Welcome to Once Upon a Quantum Leap. In this episode, we are going to take a little pause in listening to stories from the Akashic Records, and we're going to examine some terminology and some concepts and description of terms, just to clarify some of the things that we've been talking about, and also prepare us for some future episodes where we delve into more complex situations.
Yeah, some of those topics are brain, body versus mind versus spirit. We'll talk about personal experience, consciousness, how that matters, a little bit more about Akashic records and collective consciousness, just to name a few things.
Enjoy this episode. It's pretty far ranging and wide ranging, so thanks for listening. When you get down to it, these are actually very deep concepts and also simple concepts, but they take a lot of words sometimes to explain them. And
And
yeah,
historically, as well as in a contemporary view, no matter what your background is, what information you've gained up to this point, what experience you've had, some of those terminologies can be interchangeable or they
mhm,
have a distinct meaning based on where you come from, your background, the edge of the world you live in.
yeah,
So there's some of these terms you're going to hear it and you're going to say, wait a minute, this is how I'm hearing that term. That's what it means to me. And it could be
mhm,
possible that maybe we mean it a little differently. So bear with us.
yeah. Well, here's one.
Yeah,
Okay,
go
I want
ahead.
to start with. Um, I think we need to talk about the brain, the body, the mind, the spirit, and sometimes I'll
And
just say, well, the brain is up in your skull, and then the mind is an extension of the spirit that uses the brain, that encompasses everything that we do with thought. And but then that needs another explanation as well. And so what is the mind? And then what is spirit? And it goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
it sure does. And so back to the intuitive reports, they've given us a little bit more clarity on
Yeah.
the distinction between the mind, the body, the brain, spirit. So what we've synthesized based on what these intuitive reports have told us, we really want to say, well, here's how we've heard so far of what the brain is, what the body is, what the mind is, or what the spirit is. And maybe not even so much what it is,
Hmm.
but how all of those things interconnect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's maybe we can have a jumping point of, so what's this body that we are inhabiting that relies so much on the brain? Why do we
Yeah.
need a brain?
Now that takes us back to Atlantis again,
Okay.
Atlantean reports, Lemurian reports, where there's this idea of there was um there was evolution going on this planet, and that these beings, us, we visited. We came to this planet, and you can get into extraterrestrial theories with all of that, but just imagine us arriving on this planet and then watching, just observing stuff going on this planet and going, wow, that's really cool. And at a certain point, there was this idea of experimenting or maybe projecting the consciousness into some of these life forms that we were observing, just to kind of see what it's like to be in the life form looking out on this world and experiencing this physical world. And um, that's an idea of separation of spirit and matter, right? That's uh that's the idea of we're these visiting spirits and we projected into these bodies and then we got stuck in these bodies. That is one perspective of this whole thing that's going on. Another perspective that we've heard in the intuitive reports quite a lot is that the body itself, at this point in our evolution, the body itself is an emanation of the spirit and the mind. And it's like the furthest out, densest vibration of the spirit that is exploring this universe. So that idea is more like there's a continuum of consciousness that reaches all the way out into this dense
Mhm.
physical world to experience this dense physical world. But it is continuous and it's integrated. It's not this jumping in and out of bodies kind of picture.
So,
And
so
that
that
seems to be more the the
that
interpretation of these reports at this point.
well, that reminds me of being an artist. Reminds me of how I used to teach this to my students about how things are created. So I used to always do this little diagram. It's like no matter what, just think of like an idea. Like you want to, make a house out of popsicle sticks. Let's just say that. So that's your idea. The idea starts with this little seed idea, but it's in your brain first, or it's in your mind, wherever that little idea is developing. It still hasn't formed itself yet. You just have an idea of what you want this to be. And through this form of creation or creating, you start moving it out from the idea form, and it still takes on this formation as you start assembling this little house you're trying to make out of sticks. So that's how I heard you just say this. That there's this image for me as creation. This process of everything still has this energy of the original thought of how it's being created,
Hmm.
except it takes different forms as it's moving out into this more dense world as we're developing and creating it. But it still has those remnants of the original emanation of it, which starts with in this substance of our brain or mind. Again, I don't want to get too
Yeah, I
complicated
think
with that, but that's how I start visualizing it for myself.
yeah, I can see that parallel of it starts with thought. Everything starts with this thought or maybe an image, which is a thought anyway. And then it congeals, it like coalesces material substance and more substance and more substance. Like you get the piece of paper out, and then you get the sticks, and then you get this, and then you
Right.
get the glue, and it's starting to coagulate material around this
Mhm.
idea, but there's
Right.
always that central idea. I think that's a valid analogy of us. There's a particular trajectory idea of me, and you have a different trajectory idea of you that arcs way, way, way back to source emanation of you. And now we're getting into more terminology, aren't we?
We are.
Source and
But
emanation.
back to what you were saying though, again, the reports are telling us that there was a formation that was occurring
Yeah,
of this thing that we now call human beings. I mean, because we're not talking about other animals or anything. We're just talking
yeah.
about the sentient being of a human. Um, that somehow it did develop. And again, I'm using the word somehow because there's other things in the intuitive reports that provide a little bit more description to that. So I'm being vague about the word somehow, but
Yeah.
there's this creation that is forming, and it's this physical body. That physical body now has a brain, has a couple of
Hmm.
arms and legs and eyes, and this whole ecosystem that's going to start exploring and creating.
Yeah.
But it has remnants because it was created. And again, even when I use that word, please remember to listen to the best of your ability. That I'm not trying to say it's the creation story. It's not even the scientific story, but there's a blending somewhere in between
Yeah. Yeah.
of
We'll get
this
into spirit
evolution.
and science at the same
Yeah.
time with
Yeah.
things like creativity.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, so what the way I think of brain at this point is that the brain, our human brain, is it is a massive tissue. I mean, there is no denying that. But that massive tissue is part of this body, and the body is part of the soul exploring, and the soul exploring this world is part of the spirit. You see how they're all like one is it's like those Russian dolls where there's one little Russian doll, and then there's another
Yeah.
one outside of it, and then there's another one, and you've got like six of these things all encased within each other. And yet the whole thing is one. It's one being. It's one idea. It's one perspective
Mhm.
that was birthed, created, and is exploring.
There's
And
a
we have that free will too, that we can change and we can adapt and we can grow and we can explore and learn and understand as well.
Yeah, we're going I'm going to jump us to another word, consciousness. We're not going to talk about that yet, but I'm using that word as an example. When I was doing my research for the PhD work, I came across a doctor who was an anesthesiologist, and his name escapes me for now, but I will come back to that. But he was so fascinated. That was one of the reasons he became an anesthesiologist, was because he was obsessed with what is consciousness? Where does it go when people are
Hmm.
under, when we're doing operations on them?
Yeah.
So one of the places he started was to examine the brain, and he was determined to find, where does this little place of does play is
Hmm.
consciousness kind of seated somewhere in the brain? Because
Yeah.
you're not really asleep when you're under anesthesia, because you're not dreaming, or at least that's according to him. Um, so he came up with the finding that, like, there's a microtubule that still carries the echoes of a consciousness strand. Then he brought in another doctor friend, and they did more tests on the brain waves of what happens when someone is under anesthesiology. And in these tests that they did, they found that the frequency of where your consciousness is has the same rate of vibration as those monks, people who go into deeper states of meditation.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, one little piece of information of someone's interest in brain consciousness, how does it connect to the body and the mind and the spirit?
Yeah.
But when I read about that, I thought, what a fascinating time that you spent just to try to figure that little piece out. But
Yeah.
I really appreciated that he was doing his best to look at the whole complexity of the brain, the mind. How does consciousness fit in? And that's just from one angle. And of
Yeah.
course, we also look at it from the angle from a metaphysical perspective too. Like, so what are things that we can do, because we do have this brain and it's connected to what we so far are calling consciousness versus being conscientious. Where does
Yeah.
all of
That's a
that
whole
fit
other
in?
branch. Yeah.
Right? Where does all that? So how maybe a
One of the
little bit more
things that
practicalities of it.
I've heard in reports, there was a really cool report recently that we had, and it described um, the brain as a receiving, kind of like an antenna. Like it's meant to be this transponder that both receives thought from others and from beyond this physical realm and from the spirit realm or from your own spirit consciousness. And then it translates it into thoughts and images that would be familiar for this body that
Mm-hmm.
we're walking around with. So there has to be some kind of translator mechanism that's going on between just vibratory energy and pictures that you
Mm-hmm.
can relate to with your physical experience. I
Yeah.
thought that was a really good description of the mechanism of the brain and how crucial it is
Mm-hmm.
and how it's so integrated into the body, which then makes you think that maybe the whole body is an antenna of some
Ah,
sort, because
yes.
your nerves go everywhere in this
Yeah.
body. So why would we just focus on just the brain as being this receiver? Why not the whole body? And then you think we have, I think, I don't know the figure, but we have far more neural connections in the gut than we do in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got the second brain down below as well.
Yeah.
And so the whole body becomes this receiver of vibration and translator of
Mm-hmm.
vibration, and also sender and broadcaster of
Mm-hmm.
frequencies and vibration.
Right.
So good gosh, we've we've got these amazing machines that are extensions of us and that are working for us and with us the whole time. A
And
very
we're
delicate, complex instrument that we're carrying around.
and we're a, and I think the intuitive reports are urging people to become more aware of that interconnection.
Yes.
And I think that's what, again, where the intuitive reports will bring out, well, what's the significance of that past life to the present? Well, the significance is going to tell you how closely aligned you are to being aware of that connection or not, or how engrossed you are. I'm going to use that word engrossed in the material density of the world
Hmm.
in your life. And that's kind of keeps you a little bit, it keeps you more at bay of this interconnected system mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to think of a figure eight, like a
Mhm.
vertical number eight, the infinity symbol turned on its side, as a reminder to keep always a foot in both worlds, really. Like keep visiting the spiritual world and keep contact and connection with the spiritual world, but also stay in the world itself, the physical world, the down below of the loop. And then you visit the upper loop and then you visit the lower loop and to keep both worlds in balance. I think when we get out of balance, like we spend too much time up in the clouds and up in ethereal concepts and abstractness, the we forget to pay the bills, we forget to take care of the things in the physical world. And likewise, if we spend too much of our time in the physical world, we can neglect the spiritual side of ourselves.
Well, I
And
think you said the keyword balance there. And I'm going to push a little bit on that word only because I see that more as maybe a law of the law of polarity, or just the duality of things, because sometimes there's more of a degree than the balance. So it's not like you're
yeah,
just going to be right in the middle and you're balancing these two sides out,
that's true. Yeah.
right? There's a
Yeah.
degree, right? Because in that little loop that you just described, that visual eight that you described, sometimes there's a degree when we are in this higher arc. And then sometimes there's degrees when we're in the lower arcs. And this sometimes we are
Mhm.
a little bit more in the balance part of the middle.
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
think as long as we remember to balance ourselves out periodically, and also don't just stand in the middle point where you're not doing anything. You're
Right.
just bored with life and you're bored with your spiritual growth and you're just not really doing anything. I think the swings are the to the upper arc and to the lower arc are meant to um, enliven us and propel us with momentum into the other arc as well, like slingshotting ourselves.
So that brings us to a really good word called attention and concentration,
Yeah.
and an awareness of where your attention is, of how you're attuned to, or maybe away from what those.
Oh, and the other word that goes right along with that is awareness. Yeah,
Mhm.
awareness and
Yeah.
attention. What the
Yeah.
heck is the difference between those, according to intuitive research? Um, I think we both have to weigh in on this one.
Yeah. Go.
Um,
Do you want?
I asked a question a long time ago in an intuitive report. I just innocently asked this question: what's the most important thing for us to teach as teachers of metaphysics? And the answer was single-pointed attention. And
Mm,
I said, this is the first experience known and is the last experience known. Meaning, like when we're first created as these individualized beings or lights, then we're endowed with this single-pointed focus ability to go exploring
mhm.
with and learning with. It's like I talked to you before about the straw. It's the straw that you have, your spiritual straw that you slurp up life with. And that's your focal point. And we each have one of these focal points. You can't really divide that thing. And then what is awareness though? What is how is that different than
I
that
have an
point.
example of that. Let me tell you a personal example, personal experience. So you and I know this from being students at the school. One of the early on exercises is to do a 5-day, 5-step reversal. And what that and the idea is to do this exercise within how many minutes, Paul?
10 minutes usually.
Usually, right? It's just you've got to get it down.
Yeah.
So the
But yeah, you want
idea,
to shrink it down to 1 minute if you
right? You
can.
want to shrink it down as much as you can.
Yeah.
So the idea is to think back in reverse order, 5 things for 5 days. So 5 things in one day, the next day, the 5 days. I remember when I first did that, swear to goodness, godness, and it took me forever.
Hmm.
It took me almost 45 minutes just to
I
just to
remember
read
that. Yeah. Yeah.
5 things in 5 days. And I remember going back to class and sharing my experience, and students were saying, "Oh, yeah, it probably took me maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes." And I was thinking, "Oh, God, there's something wrong with me that it took me this long." However, talk about awareness. It, I became more aware of how my attention was so distracted. Like it
Mm.
was not single pointed at all.
Yeah.
It could easily be swayed. It would go one way, then I'd come back and try to just finish up the 1-day reversal. So, what is the difference for me? Personal experience is how aware I was of how easily my attention can be just moved from one place to another, and me not even be aware of how easily my thoughts can go loopy loopy,
Yeah. Yeah.
one direction to another, somewhere I'm not even sure where it goes.
Yeah. I would say, adding to that, my experience of the difference between attention and awareness is, I used to go, when I was growing up, we grew up on a farm in northern Indiana, and I used to go out in the back fields a lot and just go wandering through nature and through the fields, and I'd be out in these vast, big, wide open fields, and I just loved it. And I'd spy a bird, or I'd see a groundhog, or a fox prints in the mud, or something like that, and that would capture my attention. But I was also aware of the whole field around me. So the awareness, I started developing this idea of awareness is the field, and
Mm-hmm.
then attention is the point that you're actually looking at and
Yeah,
examining, and
directing it too.
yeah, you're directing and focalizing.
Mm-hmm.
And you could think of awareness maybe as your peripheral. I can't use the word awareness to describe awareness. It's tricky. Um, like right now, I'm aware of there's a bird outside the window, and I'm aware of the temperature of the room, and I'm aware of the sun coming in behind me through the blinds. But my attention is on these concepts and thoughts and words and what I'm saying into this microphone
Mm-hmm.
right here. So
Yeah,
that's, again, they're connected,
they
they're
are
they're
connected.
integrated, but
Mm-hmm.
one is a focalization and one is more how wide out is your peripheral consciousness.
And you're able to describe your awareness.
Hmm.
I think that's another
Oh
key
yeah,
element that's
yeah,
helpful. I'm able to describe
yeah.
my awareness.
There's kind of
Yeah.
edges to your awareness too. There's like a boundary
Mm-hmm.
mark.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could be aware of what's going on in your state, in your like in your state of the United States. And you could be aware of what's going on in the world. You could be aware of things going on the planet, the climate. But all of that is sort of peripheral. That's beyond
External.
your
Mm-hmm.
focal point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of the piece is that we would like individuals to consider is how that awareness goes inward.
Hmm.
So even just the subtleties of where your thoughts are, what thought you had. Another analogy I would use is I was sharing this with someone who was asking some advice, and I just said, "Well, did you wake up in a good mood? Were you?" And all of a sudden, your day went kind of sour, and then your day progresses, and you're thinking, "Gosh, what happened today?" And I started off in a pretty good way. to even try to retrace your thought steps of was there something that occurred within the span of me waking up in a really good
Yeah.
mood that disrupted my thoughts. So even being able to have an awareness of what sifted through my thoughts that caused my attention to then move into a mood in
Hmm.
another direction.
So you can trace a timeline.
That's
You can
right.
trace your personal thought line for the day or a timeline. Like, how did I get here from my childhood? You could trace that as well. That could be a trail of awareness
That's
as well
right.
over what
Right.
we'd call time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think all of those things are really important to this mechanism of the brain, the mind, how that connects to spirit is a good thing to like even when you're listening to us right now talk and you're listening to this podcast and you're trying to grapple with some information and make meaning of it on your own, that's good. That's your attention is sifting back and forth and wondering and hopefully your awareness is diving a little bit deeper. And one of the things that I think that will help that has helped me and that we're going to make some suggestions of how to have a personal connection, personal experience so that all of that can have a greater sense of meaning and understanding for you.
Well, okay, that brings up this idea. You brought it up just briefly there of going within.
Mm-hmm.
So these intuitive reports, they come from a very deep place within, and we call this, there's like this idea of inside you and outside you, or there's the within and there's the external world. Ultimately, I would say it's a continuum, but we experience it as a very definite, there's outside us and there's inside us.
Mm-hmm.
And this going in business can be pretty tricky for a lot of people. It's not the simplest thing in the world, but it is the most natural thing in the world is to go inside. But we just get our attention kind of stuck in this looking outward to the physical world and our senses kind of consciousness, and
And
gets a little
I'll add to
frustrating.
that
Yeah.
real quick. It's occurring that action, in my experience and in my what I believe, it occurs whether you are aware of it consciously or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I would
So that
agree.
that motion is always occurring. It's a nonstop. It's emotion. Go
Yeah.
ahead. I interrupted you.
Well, I think we're edging towards talking about ego in this idea of like what keeps you from that fluid figure eight, uh, balancing between the spiritual inner world and this outer taking care of business in the physical world. I think the ego, and we can talk about that a little bit. Um, that's what keeps us fixed in a particular stance of
Mm.
consciousness
Mm.
where we're not as fluid as we want to be, or we're not as balanced as we'd like to be. You try to meditate and you just can't. You just can't seem to
Mm.
go within. I've worked with some reporters that just had a really hard time going within and letting go of the physical world and the concerns of the exterior and allowing their consciousness to drift inward to the Akashic records or to the third level of consciousness or wherever. And I think the key ingredient is the stickiness of the ego that holds us back or holds us in a particular pattern.
Yeah, I know. See, that's another word that has a lot of contemporary and historical definitions to it,
Right, right.
depending on who you talk to. And again, we're using the word ego as I don't know, a placeholder. Can I use that word?
Hmm.
It's a placeholder of where your attention is or where your state of awareness is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And typically associated with the exterior sort of world,
mhm,
the
yeah.
physical world, or your individual identity in the world. Eckhart Tolle calls it the mind-made self. Like we invented this story of ourselves,
Mhm.
and and then we
And I'm going to
call
stick with it.
ourselves.
That's what I'm going to stick with. I'm going
Yeah,
to stick with that one because,
it's a mind-made self. It's we made this thing up, and it's a
yeah.
story, and then we live by this story, and we die by this story, and we call ourselves this story. But really, the story is always changing, and
Well, I mean,
in
as an
between lives, you're a different story as well. So
well, like I think if we had someone who was a straight scientist, very much in the material world, and I have some friends that it's like, yeah, that's about it, Kapusine. That's what I believe.
hmm,
So and I'm using the word ego not in a negative way. I'm just saying that's where some people are just in their current experience in life. You could say the same about me or you.
yeah,
Well, right now my ego is stuck in this idea of metaphysics and consciousness and the intuitive reports. That's we all have a perspective
yeah,
of where
yeah,
we're going to land, of what we want to be kind of positioning ourselves in. And I think the only distinction I have is that the fluidity of the ego can bend. I think it can stimulate us to bend and open up a little bit from our own perspective if if we allow that to
yeah,
occur. If
yeah.
there's an allowance.
When I was in eighth grade in middle school, I called myself an eighth grader, right? And then I graduated from eighth grade, and then I called myself a ninth grader, and then I called myself a sophomore, and then called myself a junior. And but all of those are identities and
Mm,
identified. But it was pretty malleable. But for
right?
a while, I believed this is who I am. I am a sophomore in high school. But that changes, and we have to be able to roll with the changes and
You want
to
to. You don't have to, but if you want to,
yeah.
roll, right?
I suppose, yeah, you could stay crusty. You
Yeah,
could stay in
right.
one particular configuration, but
Uh-huh.
I have found, and the intuitive reports would bear this out as well, that the more firm your self-identity, your ego, the more prone you are to breakage or shattering. Like
Yeah.
life circumstances will tend to knock you off balance if you get really, really firm in your stance of who you think you are,
So let's
the
talk about
story that
personal
you tell yourself.
experience. Talk about that more, Paul, about personal experience on how that's.
I would say we're going to be talking about health analyses coming up here in a while, and also creative mind reports in future episodes. And that's where I hear it most is in those deeper reports, the third level reports that people will ask questions in the creative realm with the creative mind reports. They'll say, how do I tap into creativity? I feel like I'm kind of stagnating in my life. How do I tap into this? And invariably, the answer is something along the lines of see yourself and identify yourself as more or
Mm,
greater or different or deeper, or you have to change how you think of yourself. And that's that
mm,
story that we
hmm.
tell about ourselves. That's that
Yeah.
ego story. And then once you've broken that sort of membrane of your ego, then you can consider yourself more creative, and then you can consider more options that are around you and allow in more people and
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah.
But
Because
there's like
those things,
this membrane of
yeah. Because in the way you describe that, it's the other, whatever you're so deeply attached to holding on to, whatever that ego stand that you personally want to identify and hold on to, it really it just expands and it grows. So
yeah,
it's not lost. You're not becoming someone totally different because, on Tuesday I said I'm going to be this, I'm going to stand for this, and then on Wednesday, well, some light kind of
yeah,
shone through a little bit.
yeah,
So there's still an evolution of what who you stood for and what you believed on a Tuesday. It's not gone. It's just you're looking at it from a slightly different perspective now.
yeah. We do have cultural ramifications for that, though. You know, we
Yeah.
have names for people that change their identity a little bit too much. And, call them flip-floppers or
Mhm.
wishy-washy, or you don't stand for anything, or,
Mhm.
what, I don't know where I stand with you. So there's a little bit of cultural stigma to too much malleability. So we want people to, typically, we want people to be mostly solid and mostly dependable, and we can expect certain responses out of people, but not too much. We also want you to be open-minded and consider new information and change your story of yourself every now and then.
Well, I think you said it though in those intuitive reports. It's really highlighting that this substance that we are, it it doesn't just stay in one shape or form.
Yeah, it's
Like even
meant to
nature, if we
move.
look at nature, it doesn't just stay. It
Yeah.
doesn't stay in one form.
Yeah, trees are always growing, 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 and if they fall over, well, then they're shrinking, shrinking,
Yeah,
and decomposing, and then there's
that's right.
recycling, and
That's
yeah,
right.
always moving, always moving.
Yeah. It's just that us as humans, we have this ego that either wants to stay stubborn and stay
Yeah,
really rooted or it wants to have some fluidity to it.
or maybe predictability.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
predictability seems safe in
Mm-hmm.
this world, whether it's financial predictability or food predictability, food sourcing. We
But
we like things stable, and we like things predictable, and
I think that's why there are, if you're interested in expanding a little bit more and you think, well, where do I begin? Well, there's a lot of stuff that's out there. Again, back to the personal experience.
mhm.
Whatever Paul and I are talking about now, it, Paul has arrived at it from through his own personal experience, as have I. And there are certain methodologies that can help you attune more to this openness that broadens and deepens the awareness to other levels. And that's
Yeah.
why there's things like breath work or yoga or Tai Chi or even
Journaling,
prayer,
prayer, yeah, dream work, even.
dream work.
All of those have been suggested in intuitive reports,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things and more, as a way to um, ha come to a deeper perspective of
That inward.
yourself,
Yeah.
of your
Mm-hmm.
life, just kind of adding depth to yourself. It's kind of like you go swimming in a lake and you go, wow, this lake is really nice. I don't know how deep this goes.
Right.
You might you might flip yourself upside down and swim down and see if you can touch the
Mm-hmm.
bottom, or you might just stay on the surface. Either way is fine. You're still swimming, but
Yeah.
some people they do want to find out how deep does this go and what
Yeah.
is down there.
Artwork will stimulate that, reading poetry,
Yeah,
and just contemplating on what the heck is this saying? What the
yeah,
heck am I feeling? What's evoking out of me?
yeah.
Why does one person interpret holy texts in one way versus another?
Or are there systems that I don't even know about? Are there systems at work behind the scenes of life that
Mm-hmm.
I could tap into, like astrology or numerology or gene keys, or
Mm-hmm.
that could explain a depth to me a little bit better that I
Right.
could I could plug into.
Right. Yeah, all of those are really going to help. And then as we move into, let's talk, should we talk about consciousness now, Paul? Are you ready?
Further, yeah, yeah.
Let's go
Um,
for it.
what what is
You,
consciousness?
yeah,
We
Paul,
throw
you
that
answer
term
that for
around.
us. You tell
Yeah,
us what that is. Well, first of all, let me say this. How long? That was another question that came out. How long has consciousness been in existence? Like, where did it begin? If there was a timeline of our universe. I love
my
that
answer
because
would be 42.
there you
Is
go.
that? Yeah,
42. Yeah,
yeah, just 42.
just 42.
I don't think there's an answer to
Yeah.
that, because consciousness is trying to know itself, or there's just wonderful principles and theories and holy works that have been written about this, and the intuitive reports. You can trace those back as far as possible. The earliest Lemurian reports that we have, they suggest that we've been at least coming to this Earth plane for millions of years, millions of years. maybe even billions of years.
Okay, so
And then,
pause
yeah,
there, Paul, because you said
pausing. Yeah.
Lemurian and you said thousands of years. So just draw a picture of us of what you mean by Lemurian and how did
Yeah.
that show up in the intuitive reports, and how did that signal information for us to think about timelines, maybe in a different way than we
Yeah.
have so far?
You could think of, well, if we've got this picture of the birth of consciousness, maybe you could picture the Big Bang, some huge cosmic outward emanation from some single source. Don't even have to call it creator or God, just say the source expanded, had this idea maybe of exploring the universe or exploring, just exploring, not even, there wasn't even a universe to explore. So moved outward, and you could think of the directions that this exploration emanated as individual beams of light, maybe. And those might be considered the birth of our individuality, is we're traveling on a exploration path, part of the same emanation, part of the same source, but exploring things a little bit differently. Like you explore the world from a different perspective, and I explore the world from this perspective. And sometimes our light beams cross, and sometimes not. The Hindu Vedic scriptures, they talk about yugas, they talk about the the recycling of this consciousness. The consciousness explores and then it kind of contracts back into itself and then emanates back out and then contracts back in. And there's this constant out and in
The
movement of
great,
consciousness.
the great
And
breath,
that's
the great breath.
millions,
Mhm.
millions of years old. And we've been exploring this planet millions of years uh, in various forms, though. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier. There was a point at which we first started playing with matter and participating in this denser vibration of physicality.
Mm.
And I think that's when we tend to start talking about humans landing on this planet and being part of this ecosystem.
Mhm.
But
So you mentioned Lemuria
yeah,
time. So, and I think you and I have spoken about this before, but again, trying to be clear, time, like, can we
yeah,
really call it in our time language years? Do we do cycles? I mean, I think that's where intuitive
yeah.
reports use the term cycles in as opposed to years, depending on just the time period.
Yeah. So I've
I know.
tried to interpret cycles in the intuitive reports in those early um, reports that are Lemurian or Atlantean. They do talk in terms of cycles. They don't say years. And the best that we can piece together from these reports is that um, the planet was different, our orbit was different, the atmosphere was different, the density of material existence was even different.
Mm-hmm.
Our spin, the Earth's spin and the gravity was different. And so all of that contributes to our perception of time and how we
Mm-hmm.
mark time. And if all of that stuff was different, then we can't really talk about years because, if we were in a different zone circling around the sun, and even the sun was different way
Right.
back when,
Yeah.
and it's gone through its evolution as well. So the best we can say is cycles. There was a cycle maybe around the central sun, or there was a learning cycle that happened. The bigger cycles um, were marked by major transitions of our consciousness. So there was a first cycle of Lemuria and the second cycle of Lemuria and a third cycle. But those talk about us first arriving and observing, and then maybe second cycle was us as a group consciousness participating on the planet, and then third cycle might be more us really being in forms like humanoid hominid sort of forms on the planet exploring. um, and then fourth cycle definitely in forms, but also very definitely experiencing um, individual consciousness rather than this integrated group kind of consciousness that we see in nature. It was much more individualized, and there was entrapment going on where we lost sight of our interconnectedness. So those are cycles as well that are in the reports. And those are fascinating, and they're really hard to put timelines to and dates
Yeah,
to
right.
because it's more consciousness and more fluid and more just learning based and understanding based.
And our current scientific history research starts us right around that fourth cycle,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Like we do arc back with archaeology back into Stone Age and Iron Age and these various ages, the Bronze Age, um, and then at a certain point we've got history, which is the start of language and writing languages down. But even that has been messed up in recent years because we found these temples and structures that had writing and symbology on them that arc back thousands and thousands of years earlier than what we thought
Mhm.
was the beginning of civilized uh, history. So I think we're in a really cool time of flux of our
Yeah.
archaeological timeline,
Yeah.
which might be a whole other
Yes.
episode that we explore there or have a
Hmm.
guest on that is much more versed in the newest discoveries and the ramifications of these discoveries.
Hmm.
I get fascinated and I go down rabbit holes all the time
Well, I know you and
at
I,
these
and we
places.
will at some time, at some point, still go
Yeah.
down those rabbit holes. But the
But all of
reason,
that ties back into how
yeah,
long has consciousness been
that's right.
on this planet and what is consciousness even doing? We've talked also about the ego and how it's probably best to stay a little bit flexible with how you identify yourself because
Hmm.
things change. And collective consciousness, um, we really experienced a lot more collective consciousness back in the early exploration days, in the early cycles, like Lemurian cycles and early Atlantean cycles. And now we're really investigating, exploring more of a I perspective, I'd say. We're I am an individual that happens to be part of a family, that's part of a tribe, that's part of a country, that is part of.
So before you go there, Paul,
Mhm.
can you answer a question around the levels of consciousness, especially as because in the reports, and you've also mentioned it, that we'll get into health analysis, creative mind. It goes into
Yeah.
different levels of consciousness. So can you go a little bit more into that around um, the frequency and vibration and density of that material eh, into
Yeah.
levels of consciousness? What is that? What is a
Yeah.
level of consciousness?
Yeah. In intuitive reports, um, we don't record the first part of the process, which is the conductor helping the reporter get to a particular level of consciousness, and we call them the inner levels of mind. You can think of the mind as maybe it's kind of like thermoclines. And have you ever been swimming in a lake and you go down a little deeper and you feel this cold band, or maybe a warm band that's
Mhm.
just a few feet down?
Yeah.
Um, but it's all part of the lake also. So think of that as ways that we can divide up the mind into these bands of density and bands of frequency, and um, and then the mind itself is consciousness. So everything is consciousness, and then we're this point of attention that that moves through this ocean of consciousness. And you have a certain level of awareness of a certain distance out from that point of attention. So these levels of consciousness are bands that we can explore. And
Mhm.
different things go on in different bands, just like uh, a coral reef band is going to have a lot of fish and a lot of food. And then there's a band of depth where whales sing to each other and they can communicate really easily at that depth. So
Mhm.
different things go on in these different bands of consciousness that we call the mind, which is
Okay.
kind of everything that is knowable and explorable. Did
And
I
so
lose you?
well,
Did I?
no.
Okay.
I actually probably you explained that really well. I saw the visuals of that. You did a really good job.
Oh, cool.
So thank you. You
Okay.
did not lose me. But I have a follow-up question that with again back to attention and directing, helping someone direct their attention to those different bands or those levels of consciousness
Yeah.
is where it there's going to be a different frequency to interpret, hence maybe the Akashic records,
Hmm.
right? So it's like you're going into another level, let's call it a big library, top
Yeah.
floor, I don't know what floor it's on, but and interpreting those vibrations or the frequency of what's encased in that band is where the reports are accessed.
Yeah. So my understanding from, again, from the intuitive reports, both from the school and also Casey's reports that I delved into quite a bit, Edgar Casey, um, is that in these bands of consciousness, you can do things. It's not just visiting and exploring, but you can actually participate in each of these bands and do things and build things in these bands. Like I could go um, to the fifth level of consciousness, which in general has this feeling of contraction, um, but it's symbolized by water and water elements, and it's also a place where you can easily conduct uh, telepathy if you tune into that band, that fifth level band. And then also you can meet up with people in this fifth level band. It's a great place to meet up with your guide, your spiritual guide. Things have a decent amount of form and substance, and you can build things also. You can make like a light structure and create a thing, and then invite somebody else to come in and find that thing there. And I think that's what happened with these Akashic records or the Hall of Records is perhaps long time ago a group of beings established more like a maybe even a temple that you can participate with and find an organized system of tapping into these Akashic records, these life records of people, kind of like a library
Mhm.
there. So,
I paused you before we get further. You started to go into the collective consciousness, that we, that I am.
yeah.
So please continue now on that.
Well, yeah, that might be a good jumping off point once we touch on that to then go into exploring some health analyses and creative mind reports in our next episodes.
Mhm.
Um, the we is, as far as we can tell with intuitive reports, the we is an experience of collective consciousness, as in we originally came as uh, a group and participated as groups when we arrived on this planet. And then gradually we started exploring as individuals. And storing information and participating in this planet's physicality as individuals. But originally, we were group, and whatever one part of the group did, the other parts of the group also experienced. So there was a socio-biological kind of interconnectedness of us, which we gradually moved away from, lost touch with. But I think we're getting that back. And I think this we business of the intuitive reports is a hint of how connected we really are. And just inside these inner levels, we can experience this we of collective sight or collective observation again. So yeah, I don't think we have a report that goes along with this episode, but feel free to go to the website and look up some of the reports that we have stored over there,
Yeah.
and just read up on them, study them a little bit. We'll have, I forgot what we call them, quantum flakes or quantum
Quarks.
quarks. Yeah. Quantum nuggets.
Quantum quarks. Thanks, Paul.
So extractions that we found, really cool phrases that we found in the reports themselves, and we're going to be continually putting those onto the website as well.
Right.
That just things to ponder, and that may take you deeper or trigger something in you.
Yeah.
Well, this has been, I really like this discussion. This has been really good, and we went all over the place with this.
We
So
did.
hopefully we've got some more clarity about terminology and ideas and principles, and we'll go forth into new episodes.
We sure will.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Once Upon a Quantum Leap is for your reference only. This podcast and the material is intended solely as educational information and should not be used for diagnosis or treatment of any health problem, financial, or legal advice.
You can listen to full episodes and find out about Paul and Capucine at onceuponaquantumleap.com. All reports shared on this show have been released with permission, and identifiers have been removed for individuals' privacy.
The intuitive reports referred to in each episode are available on our website, on the podcast page, and through links in our show notes. We encourage you to listen to those for greater context.
If you're interested in obtaining your own intuitive report, go to quantuminsight.co. That's quantuminsight.co. You can listen to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.